How can I tell it's recording? Oh, probably because it's solid. I'm gonna guess. Hey guys, it's Nathan. So I had talked to a couple of times during different videos about doing an interview with someone sort of like in academics or in HR, and so today I'm here with my friend David Hartman. And David, can you tell us a little bit about your background and sort of like your educational background?
Sure. So presently I am an assistant professor of psychology at Valparaiso University, and my PhD is in counselor education, and I also have a master's in sociology, and graduated kindergarten as well. Have the degree to prove it, so yeah.
That last one's the hardest part, I think.
Yeah, big paper trail in my life.
Okay, so you're fairly well credentialed. So I feel like you'll have a really solid perspective on sort of the questions that I threw together. So I want to dig into that. Just so you guys know, I always, again, recommend you watch videos in 1.5 speed. I think probably you'll be able to pick up everything that we're saying at that speed, and it saves you a little time. So, all right. David, how do you feel like your degree, and in your case, your degrees, have helped your career so far?
Well, this one is a bit of a special case for me because my degrees are very tightly related to my chosen career path. So if you want to be in faculty ranks, you need to get a certain course of degrees, including a PhD in my case. So given this was what I ultimately wanted to do, it wasn't really an option for me. So yeah.
So you feel like that, I mean, they've been pretty much direct, like this is what you wanted to do, and so you had to get those things.
Yes. There's a lot of instrumental value, I feel, to having them as well, but this was a concrete decision for me. If X, then Y. So
that makes sense. If you had to choose, so this is a little different because of your, like, it's very clear that you needed like sort of this linear path. But as you were getting your degrees, so you were getting these certifications, and sort of like it was allowing you to go to the next certification, and then that allows you into this position that you're in now. As you were getting those, how do you feel about, like, if you could choose between sort of the educational knowledge that you gained in school or like the social skills that you built during the same time, which do you feel like has made like more of an impact for you, not just personally but like professionally? Obviously there's some, like, you had to get the degrees to get to where you are, but
right.
If you could sort of tell me which one you feel like has actually made an impact on how you perform.
So educational knowledge and retention is pretty selective. I think people misguidedly look back and say, I can't remember what I learned, therefore my education was worthless. Like, a lot of times we do that about high school, right? I don't remember any algebra 2.
Oh yeah.
Therefore I think it was a waste of time. In college, could be said the same thing, especially in undergrad. And there's a distance effect in memory. Memory just fades across the board. Lectures are not always scintillating. Course assignments are quickly forgotten and often just a means to get a grade. But there are a lot of things I've learned from an educational knowledge perspective that have stuck with me. It's more that it's probably formed how I see the world and what I pay attention to in arguments, in looking at the news, and how I read and how I think. It kind of constructed a different way of mind for me. I think differently, probably as a result of being in higher education, and a lot of the sociology research bears that out, right?
Yeah.
So at least you can call it inculcation, you can call it what you want. But socially, I should show my cards here, because we're on the campus of a private higher education institution of which I belong to the faculty, and we sell kind of a small college experience, which I got to have as an undergrad. I thought that was invaluable socially. I'm a big fan of the City of Learning, some of the network that came from that, and a lot of the ability to exchange ideas that happened in a live classroom, particularly in my doctoral program, I think was pretty valuable for me. In terms of like in the public square, like rubbing elbows with people at the grocery store, I don't know that it helped me that much to make me a better citizen. Maybe it made me think about some of the economical and political implications of self-checkouts or something like that, but other than that, I don't know that it helped me immensely. So.
All right. So in general, you would lean a little more heavily towards like, hey, the education I got did really support what I wanted to do and where I'm at now.
Yeah, in my whole life, I would say. Yeah, I mean, obviously the career is one thing, but even just as a citizen, I think it was very valuable.
Right. So similarly to the educational lines, but shifting a little bit to the idea of like sort of the value of it, literally from a monetary standpoint, how did you personally handle the financial portion of your degree?
Heavily subsidized by student loans, different parts of my degrees. My doctoral program for sociology, which I left ABD, which means all but dissertation, which is also scorned status in doctoral circles. I had full tuition waiver and support for that, and also for some of my other master's program. But yeah, some scholarship, a lot of student loans though.
Okay.
So.
How have you? So I wanted to ask about the role of that degree in your earning potential, but I want to pause on that question for just a second and say like, so having had to pull loans for your degree, like how have you personally felt about managing those have you felt now later on that you're like, yeah, I'm still okay with the fact that happened?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, we all wish that we had more financial flexibility and more disposable income at our fingertips. But there are also a lot of smart ways to repay programs based on repay loans based on where you're looking to end up. So I always encourage people to not only research student loans, but also repayment options, forgiveness options, things of that nature, so you recognize the true value of your loan going in. We could wax eloquent on how higher education is overpriced and all of those things, and I'm very sympathetic to that. I do think it's overpriced, but I'm going to end up probably paying back about 60 cents on the dollar of every loan I took out. And I knew that as an informed consumer going into it. Now, if certain programs go away or certain things may mess with that calculation, but as of right now,
Sure.
it was a calculated risk. Look, did you ask about earning potential yet? I can't remember.
I kind of put that question on pause a little bit to ask about like how you sort of handled your loans so far, or more like not really how you've handled them, but more like how have you felt about having had to handle them, if that makes sense. And I feel like you answered that question well.
There's shame eating and sobbing sometimes too, but yeah, for the most part.
Every now and then I have to get an extra muffin and coffee and deal with that in the morning.
Put it on a credit card because I can't afford to pay for it. No.
Right, yeah. I had to put my loan on a loan. What role do you think your degree now, so this is hyper specific for you, but I still want to ask the question because I still want to see if you have any different perspective on this, but it seems like, so my question is, what role do you think your degree has played in getting you the work or opportunities you've had since you graduated? And it seems like you basically said, well, I literally could not have. It's played a direct role. Right.
I mean, in academia, right, we feed our own, support our own, and hire back our own. So take that as read. But even when I was getting my doctoral degree, I had to work because I chose the one program that didn't offer me full funding. So don't do that. It's not a great idea. But I ended up getting a job with a research organization, and specifically became available to me because of the master's degrees that I had. And it was enough to get me the job, but it was also enough once I was part of this research organization where I basically was able to double my salary in 6 months because they brought me on in a limited part-time role and realized I could do so much more based on my education and training I'd had. So that was quite good. That was very good. I'm actually, full disclosure, returning to that too. I'll be leaving the faculty ranks and I'm going into administration and research. So it's given me a lot more latitude than I thought it would, and was tied obviously in an academic post like this where you're on the faculty side. Yeah, you're going to need that. But even outside of that, it's opened opportunities for me to do consulting with different educational systems, higher ed, also doing some training, speaking, those sorts of things that are ancillary but also important to my financial picture. So
Okay. So it's played a pretty significant role. One, some of your chosen career path, but also it's provided you tertiary opportunities that you're like, hey, I definitely
Sure.
wouldn't have been able to do that, or at least it doesn't seem like you would have.
Not apparently.
Okay.
Yeah.
So college provides somewhat of a benchmark of capabilities. So this is what we've been talking about effectively, as you're
Yeah.
saying, especially in your roles. Like, you have to have these benchmarks.
Mhm.
It's required.
Right.
These are checkbox. No matter, sort of, despite the education,
Right.
you are required to have the certification.
Yeah, there's the credentialism, there's a logic of confidence there that
Right. Yeah.
if you have this, then you have that, and that is always a little bit unclear. Everybody has a little more or less of that, but we tend to, as a society, agree that it's probably more or less the case.
So, yeah, and I totally agree. As a person who has to hire people, like, I admit readily that I don't look for whether you have a degree or not, but if I do happen to see it, it definitely doesn't hurt. And so, because there is just a certain expectation of, like, if you have had this experience,
Right.
you probably gained something from it in an educational perspective.
Sure.
And so, if you manage to get through that, then there's some value in that. I'm on a particular side where I, would look at that and say, and I think I'm a little extra lenient, all things considered. But just tell me a little bit more about how important you think that idea of, if you guys don't know, I'm like reading off my phone because this is how I keep notes. Tell me more about how important you think the idea of this benchmark is in comparison to the actual learning that happens. Like, so I'm basically saying, how important do you think it is to certify someone versus to educate them? This will lead into a second question.
Can you articulate the distinction between that as you see it?
Sure. All of us have, sort of this, lots of stories about, oh, well, I drank my way through college. I slept through all my classes. I still managed to pass. And so.
So they got the certificate, but they weren't educated.
Yeah. And then on the flip side, so in business, we see this all the time, which is, I struggle to find a more prominent example, actually, in that if you started a business when you were 8 or 10 years old, and you've run that business for 10 years, you're going to have more business experience, business knowledge, and business capability in general, just through sheer experience, than the average MBA educated individual who has they've graduated with an MBA, but they've never actually run something. And I can attest to that idea because I have had a lot of business experience, but I haven't been in those programs. I've found a lot of value in the structures and and so kind of learning what I did not know that I didn't know.
Sure.
If that makes sense. I don't know what I don't know, and then I go into some of those education things, and then I'm able to pull structures from there and be like, oh my gosh, this is really useful, and I didn't know this. This will make me better. But what I constantly find is it's only useful, those structures that I'm finding are only useful because I already have places to
map them
against.
Yeah, sure.
And without that experience, it would effectively just be a lot of theory, and with no ability to apply the theory, sort of the theories don't even necessarily make sense or are useful. So
Yeah.
in business, I see a lot that education is important, and the way that you get the education is usually through experience, whereas the certification gives you a mental perspective, and then often leads you to failure.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things higher ed has done is sort of pigeonhole itself as practical training. And it has to be practical training in some ways because we want everybody to do it, right? The message is everybody should go to college.
Yep.
But that brings very, very practical issues of, well, if everybody does it, it then more, and it's really expensive, like then it has to provide jobs for people, right? And has to make people better at jobs, things like that. So, and that's some of the tension you're talking about, right? Because you might be more likely to get hired with a credential or certificate, but you might be have less aptitude than someone who's just sort of been learning, right? Like learning very applied, very specifically in that narrow ambit, what will make them successful in their chosen endeavor, right?
Right.
So I think that it works for certain things better than others. So if you're in a more applied discipline, I'll take my own field as an example, counseling, right? So we've seen sort of the danger of some of the chicanery, right? The tomfoolery of people just hanging out a shingle and saying, I'm a counselor, and all of the injurious things that can happen when you do that.
Yep.
So, but at the same time, I'll fully acknowledge that some people can get a credential and still be a terrible counselor.
Sure.
They're just probably more ethical and have a little bit more of a professional identity and accountability than someone who just has learned. Someone who just sort of has a gift of counseling people could be a wonderful counselor. You never know. So I think some endeavors like that, it makes more sense than others. And in business, it doesn't really, I don't know if it really matters as much. I kind of tend to agree with you. MBA programs to me, I shouldn't say this because I'm an employee of a university MBA program, they often seem like a last-ditch grab for people who are stuck in corporate America and want to get unstuck and move up in wage progression or responsibility. And they think it's sort of a master key, right, which will unlock all kinds of doors.
Yep.
Maybe, maybe not, but it does tend to happen. This is sort of the arbitrary, not so arbitrary thing, right, where somebody looks at it and say, oh, they have an MBA. If people look equivalent on a resume, it might be the thing that pushes them over the line.
Yep.
And I wish I could debunk that, but it probably happens a fair amount, right? Go with the credential.
Yeah.
So I think ultimately the way we have higher ed's kind of set up right now, it's become a distinction. It should be more of a false one. But when you educate people at the volume and higher education that we do, there are going to be trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
And I think the sheer numbers and the sheer need to fill university coffers has sort of created that distinction. Although I think it, at the individual levels, spurious. I mean, I think there are tons of people, even the people who say, I drank my way through college, they learned more, across the body of knowledge than somebody else who was working very specifically for those 4 to 7 years maybe, that undergrad took their way to drink through college. But I think you always have to bend and learn in the industry you're in. You can only fit a general education so much, even when you say it's specific. What is an MBA? I mean, it's still really broad. Business is a pretty big category, right? There's all kinds of specialized fields of knowledge and subfields that you need to know about, right? That you can only learn and applying your hand to it. So, yeah. I don't think I answered your question well, but I'm an academic, so that's okay. It's probably all right.
You may be showcasing other things now that you don't even.
Yeah, maybe.
You're answering other questions I didn't have to ask.
Okay.
So these two things tie in. These two questions tie in.
Okay.
So this is actually similar this kind of follows what we just were talking about, which is how do you feel about the relevance of a college education, which we just talked about. So
Sure.
hang on, there's more to this question.
Mhm.
When I have this, right? So
Yeah.
I have effectively, this is the combined knowledge of humanity or access to it.
It is a smartphone.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
very
as
smart.
long as I am a not super stupid person,
Uh-huh.
I can utilize the smart device in order to. But also, I have access to like, so like, not ignoring the method for the concept. To talk about something specific, I have Coursera, the app Coursera on my phone.
Sure.
I also have the app Study.com on my phone because that's what I use to study for the tests that I take. And so I'm actually studying for financial accounting right now, and I use my phone to do that studying. And so these are not just, it's not just random bits of information. Like I said, I sort of have access to the whole of all the information anyone wants to put up, which as we know is toxic in the extreme. And like it goes both ways, right? So for every person
Yeah.
who puts some useful bit of information on
Yep.
the internet, there are 1,000 people who are saying something totally irrelevant
Right.
and probably harmful. But we do have the good, and it can be searched, and there are curated good, right? So like Coursera and Study.com, I'm effectively getting what college is, which is this benchmark comes from knowing that the information you were transferred has been vetted as being useful in that thing.
Right.
That's the purpose of it. And that's why it is credentialed. So my question would be, how do you, so that's sort of like, that's a lot of background on what I want to get at, but how do you think someone, so I'm in this particular case, like me, who would say, hey, wait a minute, I did pay attention to all these free resources that I have, or less expensive, potentially, resources, but
Sure.
they're still vetted, and how do I display that I've gained the education without this particular certification? How do you feel about how do I do that?
How do you do it? You seem to be doing it pretty well. So
Sure. I mean, like
how does one do this?
How does one what would you say would be your top 1 or 2 ideas for how the person in general could, that isn't me specifically, could go about saying, I've self-educated and I can prove it?
Well, I mean, an entrepreneurial approach to education usually breeds an entrepreneurial outcome, right? I mean, that's kind of the way it looks. Because anything that grows, I was fortunate enough, the job that I mentioned being part of when I was in my doctoral program was small, and they had, the company was small, and they just said, you know, we want smart people, and we'll figure that smart people can figure things out. HR at large doesn't really do that, right? When you get to the level of having a sizable HR department, that doesn't tend to be the way it goes.
Right.
So typically, these entrepreneurial approaches tend to express themselves in entrepreneurial ventures, right?
Yep.
And you're doing ad hoc study to build the thing build the plane as you're flying it, you know, lay the tracks in front of the train as you're
Yep.
driving it, whatever you're doing, your education is filling a need along a trajectory.
Yep.
You're not just some Renaissance man like sitting in a gondola and like letting his fingers, you know, wall in the water as you know, reading sonnets and then, you know, studying basket weaving.
Right.
You're not doing that. Like all this stuff is really applied to your real world life already.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's not a lot you can do except sort of like screw the man and make like a better, you know, widget and better organization and flow to do that. And then hope that hiring people of the same ilk, ad infinitum,
Right.
works out for you. People tend to end up going with more certification over time, even if they started out sort of renegade, right?
Yeah.
And there's probably reasons for that are bigger than what I can understand, but organizational psychology, I think, probably has some good reasons for that. But I don't know. I mean, honestly, if you're getting into a heavily credentialed field, I mean, I worked for Nationwide Insurance in their corporate offices, and mean, I'm a bit cynical, and, a little self-effacing, but I effectively was making copies a lot of the day, and I needed a bachelor's degree in order to do that. Could I have learned a lot more about copier functioning from YouTube videos than I knew from my 4-year degree that would have made me technically better at my job? Yes. But the whole thing you're presuming is a very, very knowledge transfer, transactional, cognitive view of higher education, which is how you're using it, right? You're going into the education market, getting what you want or need, and pulling it out. And it has an instrumental effect for you. Higher education historically has not been intended to do that. We've taken a trade school concept and applied it to liberal arts institutions, which is weird. Bastardized, liberal arts education. And I'm not going to here to stump for the humanities and all of these things, but good Lord, you don't get them anywhere else, So I think that there is some broader good to go into a higher ed program of a certain type. I think that if you have a transactional mindset and a transactional need, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do a conventional 4-year degree, especially if you don't need the credential attached to it and you know that already. However, down the line, we also know that probability-wise, higher education will be more expensive. They may have more resources to pay for it, but you're going to be paying a higher premium at that point. And we also know from the literature that it gets harder and harder as your life sort of exponentiates with kids and responsibilities, and to go back and finish a degree if you want to switch fields. I think a bachelor's degree at this point is a pretty good springboard into more specialized programs you may want to take on later in life. So you're not trying to cram 4 years of education in to actually get to the thing you want to do that you're mature enough to know you actually want to do now. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. But I think taking, an overly transactional idea of higher education and applying it to a 4-year degree is going to leave a lot of people disconcerted, right? So, and unsurprisingly so.
Okay. And with everything you just said, and I appreciate the answer, I do want to pull out those 2 ideas still. Okay. So I'm gonna hound those down, which are, if you're in my position, which is that I would consider myself very well educated, without a credential so far. I am pursuing the credential, but I'm in the gap section right now. So I'm experientially educated. I would consider myself a person who likes to gain knowledge. So you kind of always have that chicken egg problem of do I get answers to my questions once I have questions? Kind of what you're saying, which is that transactional growth of saying, I need to lay the next piece of track. How do I go do that? And so I have a question that I need to get it answered. Or sort of the other way, do I just sort of gain knowledge and then on the premise that maybe I will find a question and can utilize the knowledge I've already gained for that someday. But I would consider myself having invested noticeably into both, but I'm still not credentialed yet. So I'm in this weird gap, I'm chasing that. And so what I need to do right now, I don't particularly need to do it in my case at this very moment, but what would be 1 or 2 specific ways that you would say, here's how you can showcase that you're educated without MBA after your name, right? So that's the simplest way when you're certified is to be I'm certified. How do I showcase that I'm educated without that particular fleece?
You still need to build something, right? Ultimately, you need to build something. Whether it's a website, whether it's a product, whether it's doing videos like this, you need to show in some sort of robust, well-crafted way that you physically can represent that knowledge. So whether it's product, service, whatever it is, website, I don't care. You need to have something physical to showcase it. After all, a degree is only a piece of paper, It's not that impressive, but we know a lot goes with that. If you can actually take that, someone with a piece of paper who has not produced anything is at a profound disadvantage over someone who has in most ways. If you're in a world where that's your objective, right? So you have to produce something. I think you have to make something physical, because otherwise there's no way to embody what you've learned, right?
Yep.
A piece of paper is a way to embody what you've learned.
Mm-hmm.
And I like kind of your utilitarian approach to knowledge, but it also makes me think of the "why does Sherlock Holmes have no friends" conundrum, because he is the ultimate, right? The consummate utility.
Right.
I have no use for that knowledge, therefore it will not enter my mind. And yeah, there's something there as well
Right.
that I keep thinking about in my mind. So that's one thing. What was your second thing you wanted to pin me down on?
That was it. What you effectively, so I actually was speaking in front of one of the business classes here this week. Fun fact, because I was hunting for interns, and I got a bunch of interest from a lot of very, very smart young people, which is a weird thing to say, but I guess I am 30 now, so a decade ahead means I can start saying that. Maybe. What they asked me for the two things that would be most useful to them. And I said, there are two things. The first one is that 50% of all knowledge is transient. And I had to explain that, but I'm not going to dive into that right now. But effectively that almost every piece of knowledge can be applied in at least half of that knowledge can be applied in some way to almost anything universally.
Sure.
So you're wearing a brown sweater. Now I know that brown is a color and sweater is a thing, right? And so now I have concepts of some fundamental things of the world.
I'm glad I taught you something
Yeah,
today.
thanks. It looks good on you.
Now I know something too.
Yeah. And the second thing that I said was make a portfolio.
Yeah.
I basically said, it's great that you're getting your college education, but I can tell you that the thing that I look for when I'm hiring is always going to be, what does your paper say? That's fine. Can you prove it?
Right.
And a portfolio is effectively that. Either
Yeah.
I've built something and so anyway, I was just excited that I didn't give them, or at least I'm justified in the advice that I gave them by what you said. So that's maybe an unfortunate sample size, but
Yeah.
it's good enough for now, I think.
Between the two of us, we can run with that.
Yeah, it just totally seems fair.
We're
All
clever,
right.
clever fellas.
I think that's probably enough from us for today. So thanks guys if you stuck with me. Hopefully you watched the video in faster speed. Thanks again to David for being willing to sit down with me. And I'm hoping to do several more of these. I have more people lined up, and I really appreciate David giving this the trial run. I keep looking down at the TV right under the camera instead of at the camera, so sorry if it's
Me
weird.
too. I think my eyes look like they're closed. You put me to sleep.
Awesome. Thanks.
Kidding.
I'm going to turn the camera up. It's way up here.